Hey guys, this is Joseph from Jouleconcepts. How are we doing today? All right, so today we're going to be looking at something I learned some times back when I started 3D. I was always all about Mograph and all that. So I was taking Mograph so seriously that everything I did virtually was all about Mograph and all that. So today we're going to be looking at Cloner to start with. So I'm very sure we are not going to finish up this Cloner. So I'm just going to pick some parts of this and explain. This is an introduction to Cloner. So you will know what some of the settings are, what they do, and how to tweak these settings to your own advantage. So let's get to Cinema 4D. All right, here in Cinema 4D, I'm going to create a cloner object. So I'm going to go over to my Mograph. Then I have all these Mograph objects. So what I need here is cloner. So if I click on cloner, I have this cloner. And notice everything is invisible. So cloner uh, is an object, is a generator object. It's not really doesn't have geometry. So what that means is that for you to have this effect, you need to have another object onto it. All right. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to bring in this cube. Let me scale this down a bunch. So I have my cube in the scene and I also have my cloner, but nothing seemed to happen. The reason is because the cloner needs an object as a child of it. So I'm going to drop this as a child. Instantly, you see this object being multiplied 3 times. So what Cloner does is just gives copy of your objects, but arrange them in different ways. So this is just one of the ways it arranges. So let's look at the settings of the cloner. So if you click on the cloner, you have your basic coordinate, which is also similar to this, but the difference is just from this third category or thereabout. So you know what I'm trying to say. So if you go to the object tab, really object tab, you have your mode, you have your clones and all that. So let's look at some of the settings. So the first thing here is your mode. So if you notice the mode is set to linear, that's the reason why we have this linear arrangement of this cube. All right. So if you check here, you notice you have your object, you have your radial, grid, and honeycomb. So if I change to radial, it arranges this object in a circular format. You can already see. So that's what this does. If you also come here and change it to grid, grid array changes it to matrix format. So you have your rows and column in 3 dimensions. Then you have your honeycomb. So this honeycomb was introduced in R19, which surprisingly is what I'm using now. So back then, this honeycomb can help you create more like floor objects. So if you want to create a particular type of floor, you can use this honeycomb to do that. So it was really hard back then, but from now, kind of simple to do. So you can see the arrangement. If I start, you see the way the arrangements are. So you have this interchanging and all that. So that's what the honeycomb is. Then you also have your object. So as soon as you click on object, notice all the settings grayed out, they go out, and the only thing you have is the object field. So what this object is saying is looking for an object for you to put into this field. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to bring in the sphere, this big sphere, and I'm going to put this sphere onto this field. So if I drag this sphere onto this field, this is what I'm going to get. So what Cinema 4D is doing, or what this cloner is doing now, is that it's copying this cube. It's having a copy of this cube and arranging them on this sphere. So you can see. All right. So we're going to go back to linear. So that's what this does. All right. So you go to the next one, which is, so I'm going to delete this sphere. Oh, I could use it actually. So let's reduce this a little bit. Okay. So the next one is your clone. So if you look at the clone, you have four options here. You have your iterate, random, blend, and sort. So the default is set to iterate. So what iterate does, you won't really see the effect of this until you have more than one object that you want to clone. So when I say you have more than one object you want to clone, it means you want to have a copy of more than one geometry and see the arrangement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in this sphere and also bring in another object. So let's say this platonic object and put them here. So let's go back to the cloner. So you can see the cloner says iterate. So what iterate means is that it reads through the objects that you have under the cloner and starts copying. So the first thing in the field is this platonic, the next is the sphere, that's why you have this, and the next to that is the cube, that's why you have that. If I increase this count, I'm coming back here. So you know what count means, meaning you want to increase the number of um, entity in this copy. So if you look at the iterate now, you have the platonic sphere cube, back to platonic sphere cube, that's how it goes. That's what the iterate means. So it's going to be taking each of the entries one by one, and once it ends in the cycle, it goes back to the first. So that's what the iterate does. So if you check the random, so random will randomly copy this. And notice here, as soon as I change to random, I now have a new feed, which is seed. So that will help you to randomly place this. So it just places this object the way it feels like. So if you feel you don't like this arrangement, you can just change the seed, then start changing the arrangement to whatever you want if you like that. So that's what this, you can see why I said you would not really see the importance of this if you have one object, because if you are iterating between cube, 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 you wouldn't really know what is happening. So then you have your blend. So what blend does is that it takes the first object, looks at the number of counts that you have, divided by the total entry, which is 3. So meaning if you say 24 divided by 3, you have 8. So that means the first object will have 8, then the next state will be sphere, the next state will be a cube. So if you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The next 8 will be sphere because sphere is the second one, then cube is the third one. So you understand what blend does. All right, so that's what blend does. Then the next one here, you have your sort. So I don't really know what this sort does, but it just takes the first entity here, and that's just what we have here. So if I change this to, notice what happens. If I change this to cube, so that's what this sort really does. I don't know what. So, but I'm going to be talking about some of the settings that I use. So I don't really use the sort. So the next one, I'm going to go back to iterate. So the next one is the fixed clone. I also do not know the settings, what this does. So maybe if you have anything, if you know what this does, please just tell me and put in the description so we can all learn together. Then for fixed texture, this is used for texture when you want to texture your object. So you are not really going to see anything here because we are not talking about texturing. So I'm going to pass this. Then the next one we have render instance. So what render instance does is that it just allows for fast response in the viewport. So when I say fast response in the viewport, that means you can move in the viewport without any lagging and all that. So I'm going to change this to grid array and start increasing this value. So let me say I'm going to increase this to 10 by 10 by 10. And notice what is happening. My scene is becoming slow. Let me try and push my system. Let me put this to 20 by 20 by 20 and let's see. You can see that I'm trying to orbit. It's now becoming really slow. All right, so this really happens by the time you are adding a lot of objects in the scene. So because 3D softwares work with polygon, so you have a lot of polygon. If I hit NB now to show me my wireframe, you can already see it's showing all this. So it's going to be calculating all these faces, and that's why it makes this whole thing slow. You can see that this is slow. So that is where this render instance come in handy. So if I click on this render instance, it becomes a little bit faster than we had before. So, and so I'm going to advise try as much as to not go overboard. You should know the strengths of you should know your system, what you can carry. So I'm going to take this back to 10, 10, 10. So this should be a lot faster compared to if I uncheck the render instance. Notice render instance. And so that's what this render instance does. It makes your work, it makes the scene fast. So I'm going to take this back to NA and go back. Then you now have your, so we are still in iterates. You have your count. So let's take this back to linear. So you have your count. So count is telling you the number of entity you want in these copies. Then the offset is just where you want to start from. So then you have this mode. The mode talks about how you want to arrange this entity or this object in this array of copy. So you have two options actually. You have your endpoint and your per step. So the default, this mode is set to per step by default. And what that means is that Cinema 4D is going to calculate the distance between the first entity and the next entity. So it's more like giving you the distance between each entries. So if you look at this per step, and if you come down, look at this position value. You have your position value, your scale, and your rotation. Under position, this object is cloned on the y-axis. That's why you have this copy moving up. If I bring this back to 0, and let's say I want to clone it along my x-axis, I just need to increase this x value. So if I make this 10 or 50, so you can see what's happening. So it's cloning along this axis. So that's what this does. So at what axis you want to clone this, you can actually clone in two axes. So let's say this, let's make this 25. So you notice what is happening. It's moving up and also here. So let's get back to this per step. All right, so per step is telling us that Cinema 4D should calculate the entry. So between this and this should be 50 centimeter. This and this 50 centimeter. Then by the time I start adding into the count, start calculating and adding in 50, 50 to 50. All right, so that's what the per step does. But if I change this to endpoint, so what endpoint means now is that I'm telling Cinema 4D that I want to have a total of a particular X value between my first and my last entry. Then any other thing you want to add should be placed in between and rearranged. I hope you understand. So let's say, for instance, I want to have a total number of 10 entity, which I've typed, and I want the distance between the first and the last to be 500. So if I put this 500, I have this object. Then if I now decide to say, okay, I want to start increasing this object, but I don't want to change the total distance between the first and the last. I still want to keep the total distance 500. But I want to have 20 entry now. See what happens as I start increasing this. Notice that this stays still and it just keep adding in between. All right. So that's different between endpoints and per step. So just what I feel you should take home from here is that per step calculates the distance between each entry, while the endpoint calculates the distance between the first and the last. So that is very important. Then I am going to skip over to this place. Then you can also change. So you already know the position. You can change the position. Then the amount just tells you the amount, the effects, as in your cloner effects, the amount. So if I say 0%, that means the copy should be 0% of this distance. So basically 0. So if I want 50% of this, I'll just make this 50. So it's just half of this distance. I hope you understand. So that is self-explanatory. Then you can also scale. So if I scale along my y-axis, see what's happening. Okay. I can also scale along the z-axis and notice what is happening. So I'm going to, the same thing happens for rotation. You can also rotate. Okay, you can also rotate these guys. So, but I want to bring your attention to something here. These values here, these transform values and the transform tab. Notice the transform tab also has its own value, while this object tab has its own transform value. So what's different between these values and this value? So what you should take from here is these transform values in the object tab is object based. You can already see it, object. So it affects objects. All right. object based. So that means if I'm to rotate this guy here, if I'm to rotate, okay, I think let me just change this to cube so you will see things better. So if I select this and increase this, so you understand what I'm trying to say. So we have this and change the distance to 50. Okay, so if I'm to rotate along my heading and I want to have a total rotation of 10, so what is happening here is that I'm rotating between each of these entities. So between the first and the second entity should have a rotation of 10. Then between the second and the third, so that means this is going to be 10 degrees with respect to the next, with the preceding one. The fourth one will be 10 degrees with respect to this one. Then this also will be 10 degrees with respect to this. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. So that is what, so anything you change here will be affecting the individual object. So if I go to the scale value along y, make it 120, notice what happens. So you are going to be adding 20% to initial value you have here. So this, as it's 100%, you add 20% to it, this is what you have. So let's now assume this becomes 100%. If you add 20% to it, this becomes what you have, and so on and so forth. So that is what this does here. But if you go to, notice this is 10 degrees. Let's change this back. If you go to the transform and try to change the heading by 10%, notice what happens. It affects the whole clone. So what you take from here is that the transform under the object affects the individual object, while the transform here affects the whole clone. I hope you understand that. So it affects everything as one. So if I make this, let's say 30%, it affects the whole object. So that means from here to here is 30%. From the first and the last is 30%. But if you come to this and let's bring this back to 0 and come back here and make this 30%, you will see the rate of deflection. Can you see that the rate of this deflection is because this is calculating between here and here 30, between here and here 30, and so on and so forth. All right. So that should be noted. Then you have your color. You can also change your color. Under the display, you can change some of this display. But for this color, if you notice the default color for this cloner object is white. So if you like to change it to any color you wish, so that changes the color of your clone. And that's what you have. Then you have your weights and your time. These are for animation. This is for animation. And you have your effector. So the effector is, this effectors tab helps you to add some more modification to your cloner object. So for instance, I want to randomize these things. I want to scale them down as they go and have some other effects. I could use my effectors tab. So the Mograph has some effectors that I can add. So, but that is not for today. Today is just talking about the introduction to this Mograph and cloner and what you can do with them. And also, let me change this to objects, and so that I can show you things you can do with this object here. So if I bring up my sphere, and remember for object field here is asking for an object for you to place. If I place this, notice what is happening. The cloner object is placing this object, is placing this sphere, copying them on this sphere. But how do you know where it's placing this? If I hit NB and see what is happening. So what is happening now is that these objects are being copied at every vertex of the sphere, and that is set by this setting here, distribution. So it's being set to copy this at every vertex, every point on this sphere. So if I'm to change, let's say for instance, I want to change to every edges. Notice they all shift. You now see them at every edge. All right. So if you come here, let's say by polygon center, it places them at center of each of these faces. Then you have many options. You have a lot to choose from. You can also choose surface. You notice surface, you now have few objects. Now surface now gives you room to now add count. So if I say I want 20, 200 counts or 500 counts, then I have this object. Then you have this last one that I like. You have access to, but this is the one I also like. That is volume. So what volume does is if I'm to hide this for a moment, notice the difference. Volume copies this object inside the object. So this is spherical object, so just compact the whole object into the spherical object. So you have this sphere arrangement. So that is it for that. Then you also have other options. So you can just play around with these other options. Let me just talk about this honeycomb and just stop with this. So if you look at this honeycomb here, so let's say for instance, I want to arrange these guys and have this copy. So notice for this honeycomb, I have this orientation. I have my X and Y orientation. I have my all these things. So the default is XY. So if I change to ZY, notice what happening here. It changes. Also, notice this changes. So if you want it to be lying on the floor, you have that. Then you also have your offset direction. Is it by width or by height? Okay. So that's there. Then if you notice for this your offset, you have your count width. So if I start reducing this width, notice what I sorry, this count, not that. Let's make it 10. So you understand what count does. But this is where I'm coming to the size width. So if I start reducing this width here, you notice the kind of effect we're going to get if I get close to this object. So is anybody getting a vibe of what you can create with this? All right, so what's the name of this kind of floor, if I can remember? So if I start increasing this count, so so it was hard to create this kind of floor in the previous version of Cinema 4D, but since the introduction of honeycomb array, so you now have option for you to create this sort of design and you are fine. So with this, I think I'm going to stop this tutorial here. This is just an introductory tutorial into Cloner. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to be talking about other settings and adding the effector, and then we'll look at what we can do with different effectors. So do have a wonderful day and God bless you. And by the way, if you are new to my channel, please do subscribe because I do tutorials like this every time. And also, I would like you to please comment and share the video because it helps me in the YouTube algorithm. So do have a wonderful day and God bless you. Bye.